Ballpark Nation presents. Welcome to Go Astros, your look at the two-time World Series champions from three guys who have been here since Art Howe had hair.
Good morning, Astros fans. It is Monday, August 5th. Some days you're going to have a really prepared show, and some days we're going to practice the ancient speech debate conference art of extemporaneous speaking. I'm Andy. That's Brian. Jim is off doing his job that actually pays him. I don't know where the level of commitment is these days, but frankly, it's lacking from what I can tell. Brian, how are you this morning?
Good. I'd like to know that I took fourth place in the Klein Hoke High School freshman level extemporaneous speaking competition. I think there were five. So,
we should be fine. I remember placing when I was a young lad at St. Ambrose at both the St. Thomas and the St. Agnes speech competitions. And it was very much, we need somebody to compete in this. Throw Andy in. He'll talk for 5 minutes on something.
And you grew up to be a podcaster. What are the odds?
Like every other middle-aged white male in America. Yay, us. We're trying to put a positive face on things because this has not been a great week for the Houston Astros or fans.
Wasn't Pommel Horse Guy a really cool story?
Yes. If you're looking for positive things, Simone Biles is fantastic, and Stephen blah, 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 blah is also a great story. You hope you can
build a statue in Houston of Simone Biles, but don't make it life size. Make it bigger than life size so it actually looks,
I think you would have to bring it up to scale to put it next to the Elijah Wan statue that doesn't exist, and the Nolan Ryan statue that doesn't exist, and the Earl Campbell statue that doesn't exist. We're not big on statues here. I've noticed some other cities, lots of art installations, and not here in Houston. But you can't move a middle-aged or a middle-class family into it, so why would you build it?
If you build it, no one will come. So you understand
It is fair. So the Astros had a stinker of a weekend against the Tampa Bay Rays, who, and maybe you can explain this to me because maybe I wasn't paying enough attention, but I know a lot of prognosticators said that we would have trouble with the Rays. I was looking at the Rays as coming in as basically a decimated AAA level club because they traded away so many players at the trade deadline. And yet they handled the Astros fairly effectively, winning 2 out of 3 and really shutting down the Astros the last 2 days, really all 3 days, but especially the last 2 of the series.
Most of those players were on offense. They had harmed their offense, but the Rays are quite capable of finding some random dude in AA no one's ever heard of and getting, 2 innings, 4 strikeouts out of that person. And again, the biggest problem for the Astros right now is the offense, right? So the fact that the Rays harmed their offense didn't hurt them this weekend.
And that's kind of the topic. Is this a slump, or is this we're back in April Astros baseball where we just aren't going to hit the ball at all in any kind of situation? Because this week, and really since the All-Star break, we haven't exactly lit the world on fire. We've had a good series against the Mariners. We've had a good series against the Dodgers, and then we've had less than in those. And the trouble throughout throughout all of those series has been really poor offensive play. And it feels like, and I'm probably wrong, but I will couch this with it feels like Altuve, Bregman, and to some extent Alvarez are all slumping at the same time, which means we don't have an offense.
Yeah, Jordan is not, but the other two definitely are. And, when you have this is what we saw at the beginning of the season where you have 4 stars on offense and only 1 is hitting. Obviously, they have a problem because they only have 3 stars in the active roster right now with Kyle Tucker's leg being amputated, apparently. But, this is, they're getting poor hitting from guys like Mauricio Dubon, but you don't rely on Mauricio Dubon. They're getting, Jake Myers hasn't been his best self, but all that can be overcome if your top of the lineup guys do something like that. And I think our friend Cody Poach, who posts on Twitter at Astro Numbers, had a tweet yesterday and looked at the weighted runs created plus since the All-Star break. for every Astros player. And the nice thing about weighted runs created plus is 100 is league average. And good news, Jordan and Yiner, if your name starts with Y, you're over 100. If your name starts with any other letter of the alphabet, they were less than 100.
I know splits are kind of cherry pick. I mean, they're the ultimate form of cherry picking, but in post All-Star break, where this team went into the All-Star break in a virtual tie for first place, and throughout all of this, we should say the Mariners aren't great.
Yeah, they also can't hit.
Are even worse. We're still only a game out. Where I'm concerned from a performance standpoint is that we're walking very narrow tightrope because we keep losing ground in the wild card race.
Yeah.
So if the goal is to make the playoffs, we're giving ourselves one avenue to do that at this point. It is still August 3rd or 5th. There is still nearly 2 months of the season left to play. So a lot of things can happen. But looking at trends, from a certain point in time, as you mentioned, Yiner is hitting. Victor Caratini, who's not a full-time player, is hitting. Jordan is hitting. Chaz, to some extent, is hitting. Certainly better than he has been through the season. And then if I didn't just mention your name, you're below 700 in OPS since the All-Star break. 700 to me is kind of a league average number. I know it's not exactly that, but
works well.
So if you didn't hear me mention Jeremy Pena, Jose Altuve, Alex Bregman, John Singleton, Jake Myers, Mauricio Dubon, those are pretty much the rest of your roster. Those guys are all not hitting at a league average level right now. And so it makes sense that you get it might be a career best start out of Spencer Arrighetti yesterday. You get a great start from Kikuchi on Friday, and the result is you lost a series that was probably pretty winnable.
Yeah, I mean, they needed to score 2 runs yesterday, which is not a heavy ask, but right now it is. You talked about sort of cherry picking stats, and the reason it's problematic to cherry pick stats is because how you're doing that particular period of time is not necessarily predictive of how you'll do over the long run. But it is useful for why are the Astros struggling right now? It's 90% of the offense. Why is this different than April? The offense wasn't great in April. The pitching staff was a disaster. The good news is the pitching staff has righted itself. Both in terms of they were pitching in some bad luck, particularly in the bullpen in that period of time. And, of course, the starting pitching was we had the Blair Henley start in that period, I believe. And the starting pitching was a complete and total disaster. The pitching staff has righted itself. They have found a good enough combination in the bullpen. But the offense is slumping right now. Will it continue to slump? Certainly not at this level. But when they came up to tie in the division, to take the division lead at the All-Star break, it's because they were getting really good offensive performance throughout that period. Are they going to get back to that? It'd be nice. No, I'd expect. Will they regress to a mean that's higher than this? I would expect they will. They certainly need to. And tonight in Arlington would be the best time to do it.
The pitching staff has been better, and they've been very generous. Saturday, they gave up a lot of souvenirs for fans in the Crawford boxes, which was really sweet of them. I thought those are not cheap tickets, so it's good that you go home with a prize. The bullpen seems very hit or miss to me right now. And again, it's a seams thing. I think we have pieces that are better than others. I don't think in a playoff situation we are probably pitching Kyle Orton in any kind of situation or Brian King in any situations that actually matter if those guys even make a playoff roster. There are pieces that are potentially coming back or coming to the Astros in Penn Murphy, maybe Luis Garcia. That even feels iffy right now to improve that situation. But the starters, especially with the news that Verlander is probably on his way back in the next 7 to 10 days, depending on how his rehab start goes, that the rotation could solidify. And that could, in theory, strengthen the bullpen because one of those starters either is going to go as part of a 6-man rotation or get pushed to the bullpen. But we are starting to get to the point of the season to thinking about what the playoff roster might look like should we make it. I'm still of the belief that this team's going to make the playoffs. I am worried that we've given ourselves, like I said, one path to get there. But the Mariners don't seem to want to block that path for us very much. So it really is. If you've checked out of the Astros, you should check back in, because this week notwithstanding, this is still a team in playoff contention. And as we say constantly on this show and throughout baseball, if you make the playoffs, all bets are off as far as what your record was. It is literally a crapshoot, and there is no. Matter of fact, I think there's some conversation that it's better to go in as a wild card. It has at least worked out for several of the last few World Series champions.
Yeah, I mean, you got to play one more round. So it's sort of one more, essentially the insight on the playoffs is they're a crapshoot. They are essentially a dice roll, and, over under is, basically sort of how is sort of whatever comes out. Baseball doesn't sort of work in short series. It works in longer bursts. And the bigger issue, of course, is getting to the playoffs. We can worry about the playoffs when we get there. This isn't 2022 or 2019 where everything they do for 4 months is just setting themselves up to win the division series. They need to figure out how to beat the Mariners between now and then. So, they've stabilized their bullpen. Caleb Ferguson didn't have a good first impression, but, he's got more chances to do something in the bullpen. Brian King I don't want him pitching key innings in October, but he's done very well. Taylor Scott's obviously been a revelation, and he had a rough game on Saturday, but, that happens. Overall, the bullpen stabilized. And it would be great. I've said this many times. I think Spencer Arrighetti's best role on this team is as a multi-inning weapon out of the bullpen. Will they ever get him to that? Well, that depends on, frankly, whether both Justin Verlander and Luis Garcia come back, and those are basically your only options right now to get someone.
And to talk to that a little bit, I know hindsight is it's great because we have the benefit of it, but it feels like the Astros, and especially our GM Dana Brown, put a lot of eggs in the basket of Lance McCullers Jr. and Luis Garcia coming back and being effective post All-Star break. We learned over the weekend that at least one of those things is not happening, and I am not here to bury Lance McCullers Jr. Not necessarily here to praise him either, but I think the criticism of Lance McCullers Jr. and yes, even on this show, we have had fun at Lance McCullers Jr.'s expense because some of the things we've seen over the last 2 years of just, the angles of which the slope of the mound that he's thrown on have been promising. And we've been given a lot of hope without a lot of substance behind it. But it's not without regret that McCullers is going to miss his second consecutive season from both a baseball perspective, a personal perspective, as well as the financial perspective of hardwiring into Jim Crane's mind. Long-term deals for pitchers aren't a great prospect. And you can make that argument because I think there's a lot of organizations that do that. But McCullers Jr. signed a contract and I think has pitched 22 innings since that contract has been active. We're in the third year of it.
Yeah. And 3 playoff games in 2022, one of which was really awesome, and 2 of which were, overcome. I mean, it's so one is, I feel like I'm making fun of the media coverage of Lance McCullers, and I make this point. It's like, I don't think that's necessarily anybody's fault. Lance is one of the more open members of the team with sort of media, so he gets covered more than other players. Most Astros right now are just kind of like, I'm not into what the media is. It's fine. And of course, we get lots of stories about, up the mound, down the mound, how many pitches. So you're right. But the 2 big stories here, right, is like, Lance McCullers is a baseball player. And you know what baseball players don't like to do? Not play baseball. It's frustrating and annoying for him, right? And then as a matter of this team, it could really use an extra starting pitcher, or he could have been someone they put in the bullpen at the end of the season. That won't happen. And finally, it's, as you raise, Andy, it's an issue sort of what does this say for going forward? This is the only long-term pitching contract the Astros have signed in the Jim Crane era. And it remains to be seen sort of, for 5 free agent years. It remains to be seen. The other person they signed to a 5-year contract, though it covered arbitration years, is Christian Javier, who had Tommy John surgery this year, which is, the fate of a lot of pitchers here. This actually raises, I think, an important point about why they targeted Yusei Kikuchi. He's been on the injured list twice in his career. Once was for 1 day for COVID, which basically tells me he got a bad test result. Mm-hmm. The test screwed up, not his immune system, and had like a neck injury for 18 days. He's got a great record, it seems to me, particularly compared to the other rental option on the market, Jack Flaherty, who has had some back issues this season. The Astros targeted durability, and it's hard to blame them for that based on Wade's arms and everything going on in the pitching staff.
I mean, based on Justin Verlander's results this year, we would love an 18-day neck injury. That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Where can we get one of those? Because I think we're on the 45th day of Justin Verlander's neck.
Christian Javier had a neck injury, came back, and then Tommy John. So apparently it's a really long neck ligament he's got.
Yeah, it's the news about Luis Garcia similarly has not been as encouraging. I don't know that that's so much and to some extent this is true with McCullers Jr. I don't know so much that Garcia is slow in progress as in that we're getting to the point of the season where we're running out of time for him to come back and make any kind of meaningful contribution without risking additional injuries. He's just not stretched out to do much more than an inning right now at a major league setting. There is still some hope that he's going to come back as a starter. That's probably not a reality now. So maybe he improves your bullpen. But that's, as you mentioned, Verlander, Garcia, and then Penn Murphy coming back. Those are the reinforcements, barring some really weird Angels sell off of their roster like they did last year, and you decide you want to pick up some of those guys. And usually you don't find effective pitching in those sell-offs.
No,
Although if there was an organization that was going to sell off pitching for no reason at all, it would be the Angels.
Yeah, that's the one. You could claim someone off waivers. And sometimes those are arranged. But part of why they're arranged is one team doesn't want to pay their salary and another team does. And it's unclear that Jim Crane wants to pay extra luxury tax. And I think they're in the 30% threshold now. I don't have that confirmed. Jim Crane seems willing to do that for Josh Hader, someone at the top of the market. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem clear to me he wants to do that for a guy he might have to DFA when Luis Garcia gets back on the 40-man roster. And so it's easy for us to spend his money that way. It's a little harder when it's your actual checks you're cutting and Major League Baseball punishes you for trying to improve your team.
You did mention Mr. Kikuchi, who is our latest addition to the rotation, had a very good start after the first inning, had a little bit of a rough first inning, first 2 batters, I guess, but then settled down and gave a really good performance, really kind of a shot in the arm that the Astros needed because you need somebody who's can consistently pitch into the 6th inning. You talked a little bit about why the Astros targeted him. The heartburn from Astros fans were that he's not as well-known a quantity. He's not I think a household name when it comes to baseball players, especially knowing that he spent the last 2 seasons in Toronto, which for all intents and purposes can be Siberia for a lot of baseball fans. The other part of that is the perception of what the Astros gave up. And I think that we may have different opinions on this, but I would slot what you gave up from an order of loss or magnitude of loss. Jake Bloss is probably going to be the best piece that moved in there. Loper Fito's down the list from that, but certainly second, and then Will Wagner. There's a couple of moving parts in there that I'd kind of like you to expound on. What exactly, from your perspective, did the Astros really give up? What does that mean for this season and the next few seasons? But also, how much do we just fall in love with people because they wear a jersey and they don't necessarily have the performance or the projection to back up that love? And that's especially when you get into I'm not picking on anybody in particular, but I was reading after the trade about Will Wagner being a top prospect in our organization. There is no such thing as a 26-year-old top prospect. That's not a real thing. And yet Astros fans, especially on Twitter, which I get a lot of my formation from, seem to think that performance at Sugarland equates to incredible performance in Houston. And that just hasn't borne out to be the case.
Yeah, and Will Wagner lacks a clear defensive position and seems like his most likely major league job is his utility guy, which can be a valuable guy if you develop further. He's 26, so, he's the least valuable part of the trade. He's the one sort of easiest to give up. On Bloss, right? There is a world in which Justin Verlander's neck is not whatever it is. It's not made of spaghetti at this point, or, really a 40-year-old neck, which is, I shouldn't, his neck's been quite healthy throughout his career, but he's 40, so he has old man injuries, as we made the point before, right? There's a world in which Jake Bloss a month ago got promoted not to the majors, but to Sugarland. And Astros fans are like, okay, he's just some prospect. Remember reading some comment, this is now over 20 years ago, on a sabermetric message board, is like, I think this reporter thinks prospects are what the Lenape gave to the Dutch, or what the Dutch gave to Lenape to buy Manhattan.
Beads, baubles, and prospects?
Something, yeah, something like that. But of course, every good Major League Baseball player was once a prospect. Finding the good ones and sort of sorting through that, you want to trade your Seth Beers and JB Bukauskas and not your Teoscar Hernandez's. To use some examples, and it'd be nice if you could figure out who your Francis Martez's are and trade those at the top of their value, as opposed to
a Frankie Tuesday reference on Monday.
Let's go through some guys they should have traded, right? That they didn't get any value out of. But again, part of the, and of course, if we were sitting back in 2018 and they traded Garrett Cole for a couple of, I've never heard of this Framber Valdez and Christian Javier guy, we wouldn't have batted an eye at that. We'd have been real happy with Garrett Cole, and we wouldn't have won the 2022 World Series. This all is sort of like, we talked about hindsight earlier, right? I now have great hindsight on these trades that they definitely should have traded, Jason Martin rather than Jeremy Pena. Joey Loperfido. Okay. And so Jake Bloss, the biggest, I think, effect of Jake Bloss is you take away your six-starter option, your option to go to six starters right now. I think one of the biggest effects is on the current team if you're worried about the innings increase for Arrighetti and Ronald Blanco.
And Hunter Brown to some extent.
I'm less worried about that, but everyone's, more people sort of express that. So long term, it's unclear what Jake Bloss is going to be, partly because, he's a late bloomer, and partly because he's had so little time in the minors for you to sort of project forward. What we've seen from Jake Bloss is that he is not consistent enough to be a league average major league starter in the 3 starts we've seen from him. But of course, in an ideal world, he'd still be down in the minors honing his craft and be an option for rotations in the future. What we've seen from Joey Loperfido in the majors is he strikes out a lot. Batting average isn't as terrible as it could be based on that. He's not been able to tap into his power, but also 25 and improving, right? It takes away an option from the team basically for next year in both of these guys, and they've got to sort of figure some of that out. But of course, 2024 is a really big deal for the Astros. As again, if they get in the playoffs, they've got a team that, for all the flaws we see in the team, they've got a team that can be competitive in the playoffs, both from a just sort of standard anyone can get through in the playoffs, and because, some of the advantages of this team, like having a really excellent back of the bullpen, get magnified in the playoffs. Some of their flaws get sort of undervalued, and you got a hot streak from Alex Bregman or something. That's a big deal. They targeted Kikuchi, I mentioned, for his durability, but the second reason is he's got, he has a frustratingly high ERA throughout his career, and lots of people think they can fix him. because he has really good pitch shapes. He throws a really good fastball. The Astros have worked. Astros immediately implemented had him use his changeup more, and that was quite effective. He strikes out a lot of batters. There's reasons for him to be sort of promising, and I think he's the most. And it's clear to me, particularly looking at the market, they got why they targeted him over any of the other options. He is, I think, by reputation, the second best pitcher who moved after Jack Flaherty. But when you include durability, it's clear to me why he's the best pitcher. 2024 is a huge year. They're basically all in this season, which was clear when they got Verlander last season for Gilbert and Clifford, and again when they went top of the market and signed Josh Hader this offseason.
Yeah, it's also interesting from Kikuchi specifically. There was a lot of animus because his numbers, especially from an ERA and a WHIP standpoint, aren't exactly elite. I also look at those career numbers. I know the Seattle teams that he played on weren't exactly known for their defense. I can't speak to that as much with Toronto because I think Toronto has better personnel in some spots, but defensively, he has not been helped by the teams that he has been on. Is that worth another run on your ERA? Probably not, but there's probably some of those numbers are a little bit inflated, especially from a WHIP standpoint. He still does have the problem of getting hit hard when he gets hit. And so he's not an ace by any means, but the Astros went into the market hoping to get a 3-starter. And I think they got a 3-starter in 2024 baseball.
No ace move this year. There was not an ace out there that was available. So did they get the best pitcher? You can make a good argument for it. Did they give him too much? Yeah, at some level, yeah. Does that matter? I'll tell you in October.
And again, I think your point is very valid. If you had given up 2 players that weren't on the major league roster but were in Sugarland, for instance, I don't know that this same level of heartburn would exist because Bloss has been in the organization for had been in the organization for right at a year at the time he was traded. He was a 3rd-round pick last year. And Loperfido had great power numbers in the minors. As you mentioned, it did not translate yet to the majors. It may. And I wish both these guys great careers, but the odds are against them as they are against every player in baseball. The average career is still something like less than 4 years. And that's for the thousands of players in the minors who never get a sniff of the major leagues. So these guys have beaten the odds just to get to this level. But to say that they're going to be future All-Stars or future Hall of Fame, I mean, some of the hyperbole I saw is just – it was a little bit overboard.
It's unclear they will be future regulars. I mean, and so here are 2 parallels who I think are people who are, the type of players they could be, parallels. Joey Loperfido could be Chas McCormick, who's a really valuable player, though he's never quite been a regular. Never quite gotten 500 plate. He hasn't gotten 500 plate appearances a season. I'd have to check if he's on pace for that. He's probably close to it this year, but he's never been the single everyday sort of option. We've debated that, but he is a valuable player. Jake Bloss could be Jose Urquidy. Now, an important thing for teams is to have league average players. And I think Jose Urquidy over his career, his ERA, his ERA plus is like either 1 over or 1 below, league average, 1 below league average. He hasn't been durable. That's hurt him. But, just putting that guy out there is valuable for a team as long as you have better players. So the bad news is that can hurt the team long term. If you had 6 years of league average starting from Jake Bloss, that would be valuable. The good news is it's not as hard to find that, either through the free agent market or through developing your own prospects. So this can be overcome if, say, the people they drafted this year turn out to be just as good as Jake Bloss, which, again, are they? I got no idea. No idea. But that's, again, part of the job of being a general manager is not only finding guys who can attract others, but finding players who can replace the players you trade because you're going for it this year.
Well, and I think the other part of that is as Dana Brown settles into his role as GM, and I know that's weird to say in a second year, the biggest effect he's going to have on this organization is through draft and development. I think he's shown that what he inherited at the upper levels of our minor league system, he was not necessarily in love with. Yes, Jake Bloss was one of his draft picks. I'm sure there was some personal pain letting that player go because, it was your second draft pick last year. I think it was third round, but I think we only had two for whatever reason. But by and large, there has been a lot of what I would say organizational fodder sitting in Sugarland. And they've had a great season in Sugarland, especially in the first half this year, but very few of those guys, and I'm starting to see it with Shea Whitcomb now, where people are projecting this AAA performance, especially when you're playing in PCL parks, into the majors, and it just doesn't translate a lot of the time. The Astros don't view Shea Whitcomb as a prospect, but somehow our fans do. So it's going to be interesting to see how rapidly he continues to promote the players that he drafts and signs, and how quickly or how fungible he sees the players that he inherited, because I think it's going to accelerate even more in this offseason. Wrapping up here, the Astros are going into Arlington, as you mentioned, for 3 starting tonight. It appears we're avoiding Nathan Eovaldi. We're not going to see Scherzer because he's on the IL now. So what are you hoping to see outside of winning a series? Because that would be nice to do. We haven't done it in a couple of weeks, against a Rangers team that if you think the Astros are floundering, the Rangers are doing it worse.
Yeah, and the Rangers just lost Evan Carter for the season. He's been out for a while. They did get Josh Young back finally. They've been a mess, but again, their pitching is in real shambles. And, part of their, they were hoping to get some guys back. Hoping to get Scherzer back. They would put him in the IL. They were hoping to get Tyler Mahle and Jacob deGrom back, and they haven't come back yet. And, so, what I hope to see from the Astros, I hope to see them score some runs, because they're better than what they've been since the All-Star break. And again, over the long term, they'll regress to their mean. But, the long term matters a little less now that there's less than a third of the season left, and the short term matters a lot. So scoring runs would be a key to winning this series.
Yeah, I'd like them to get back on their winning ways month-wise. They finished July 14 and 11, so good, not as good as June, better than April. But they really kind of petered out at the end. They need to get back to winning games. This series in Arlington, I think, is important, from a making space between the Astros and Mariners and the Rangers. It is the last time we play the Rangers this year. The Silver Boot, I guess, is on the line. I think if I counted right, the Astros need to win one more game to win that stupid trophy, and then, we'll be getting rings some point next year as a fan giveaway. But then you go to Boston, who is playing well. You go to Tampa, who just handled us pretty neatly. So it's a 9-game road trip that I think is going to define a lot about what the rest of the season could look like. Because honestly, the schedule doesn't get any easier in August after that. Outside of a series against the White Sox, you play these Red Sox again. So 6 against the Red Sox. You play the Orioles in Baltimore for 4. You go from there to Philadelphia. These are all division-leading teams, or teams squarely in the playoff hunt. And then you finish up the month at home against the Royals. So outside of this series against the Rangers and the series against the White Sox coming up in a week, it's big boy baseball. And the Astros need to start firing on all cylinders.
Yeah. Broadly, they need to outplay the Mariners over the long term. This is a challenge for that, but they often play better against good teams because I don't know why. So hopefully that comes through.
Well, it's a little bit of an art and a little bit of a science, isn't it?
They spent 2023 playing with their food, but in the end, they did the minimal amount of work to make it happen. Much like Noah Lyles in the 100-meter dash yesterday.
Yeah, it was very interesting watching that and watching the qualifying semis, where I'm just not going to run quite as fast as I feel like running, because why? Yeah. All I got to do is make it. I think on that note, go watch Simone Miles this morning win another gold medal, and good luck to the Astros this evening in Arlington, and look for a series win.
Mondo Duplantis is pole vaulting today. The world's best pole vaulter comes from Lafayette, Louisiana, and he's Swedish. I can't really give you a good explanation of that. That just happens to be true.
That is the joy of the Olympics. With that, we will leave you. That is Brian Arbor at Orange Fire on Twitter and other socials. I'm Andy Tomcheson. Jim, you are missed. Hopefully you'll be back next week from whatever your current boondoggle is. Go Astros.
Go Astros.